This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today, I'm honored to have Chuck Moller on the show. He is the founder and CEO and executive coach at MCG Partners. He's also the author of a book called The Rise of the Agile Leader. Can You Make the Shift? Which we're going to be talking a lot about leadership. He likes to help people become better leaders, help find the potential within the C-suite executives or within team members and any leader that is out there that really wants to make a difference and grow their team, which is exactly why he's on the show. So, Chuck, welcome.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today, and what is it that you guys are doing?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in management consulting most of my career. I probably spent a good first third of my career kind of experimenting, right? I did a little work around strategy, did a little work around process reengineering, did some work around change, managing change, M&A. And then about 25 years ago, I got into the leadership development, talent management space. And I did everything from work, again, going back to experimentation. I worked for a big global consulting firm, and then I did a couple of startups where I built my own practices, and I eventually launched a global practice, and then eventually ran a practice and had my own sort of leadership challenge at one point where I got some hard feedback, and I had a choice. Was I going to really figure out what leadership was for me or stay on the path that I was? The good news is I took it to heart. I started investing my own leadership capability, and fast forward, I became CEO of a global consulting firm. I did that for a number of years. We grew the firm, and then we got acquired twice in 1 year in 2006. Anybody who's been through that knows how challenging that can be. And I did two integrations, and I was a little burnt out. And I started traveling again for the new company. And I had 4 kids at the time. They were very, very young, and I just said it's time for me to start my own firm, and that's what I did. And my business model very similar to the firm I was running. In terms of, we do leadership development, we do talent management, we also do some organizational effectiveness work. And then I also became an executive coach. So in addition to owning and running the firm, I also coach and advise leaders and leadership teams. So that's my background.
Awesome. And I love the fact there's several things I want to hit up there. One, you talked about acquisitions, and I've gone through one and I'm in the middle of another, and I know exactly how stressful that can be and how busy that can be. And it's one of those things that I think we all come out better afterwards. There's a book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle's the Way. And whenever I see an acquisition, I see that as an obstacle, but also realize that's the way. That's the way forward. That's the way of opportunity. That you can see that as either as a difficulty or something. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want to do this, or as a way to grow and become a better leader going through that. And the other thing that I really like you said is experimentation. My first job as a manager, I was managing a web and mobile development team. And I used to tell my team that this is my lab. This is my lab. We're going to experiment on different things. We're going to try things. And if they don't work out, great. We'll talk about it in retrospective, and we'll try something different. We'll shift gears. And I use that to kind of learn a lot about leadership and a lot about what works and doesn't work in managing projects, managing teams, and just figuring out how to communicate effectively, because I was terrible at it at first. And it's one of those things that I like the way you talked about experimenting. That's pretty cool.
No, I absolutely. I still believe in it. I mean, I think experimentation should never stop. You've got to sort of manage it differently as you evolve in your career and as you run bigger organizations. And you also have to understand that experimentation involves change. And some of us are very driven for change. Some of us see change as a threat. So kind of understanding your audience, understanding your people, what motivates and drives them is really huge. It's really a big part of this whole notion of how to be successful as a leader today.
Yeah. And, so how is it as a manager or leader, can we operate in that changing environment? Because things are like going crazy right now with lots of change. And like you say, there's some people that they, strive for that. They enjoy change. They look after ways to improve and change. And there's other people that they want to have their path defined and stick in that path and just make that path deeper and deeper and deeper and carve that over and over again. How is it that we as leaders can adapt and work with both?
Yeah, so and that is really kind of the critical nuance of leadership. I think early in my career, and maybe you and maybe others listening to this can relate to this. I always was trying to figure out why people were a certain way. Like, why can't they change? Why can't they be adaptive? Why are they always like, very methodical and resistant to change is a good example. And it really never dawned on me that people aren't doing that on purpose. And it sounds kind of silly saying this because we all get personality, whether you're exposed to personality assessments or not, that people are simply wired that way. That's kind of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
We all have the capacity to adapt. But, if you're wired very strongly in one way, even adaptation is going to be minimal to the naked eye. So we have to sort of understand and accept that some people are literally wired a certain way. It's really why we gravitate towards certain roles. For example, some of us really gravitate toward accounting, bookkeeping, programming type of jobs. Some of us really gravitate toward where every day is different, business development or jobs that require a lot of change, a lot of intensity, that multitasking, a variety of things on a daily basis. So there's a reason why we're attracted to certain jobs, certain work environments versus others, because kind of how we're wired naturally.
Yeah, for sure. And, we see that in the tech world all the time where some people are really good at, they're back end developers, databases. They like the more structured roles. And then you have other people that are front end UI, UX designers that like more of the creative aspects. Of course, I like to say they're all creative because we're always creating solutions to problems one way or another, but they're different types of creative work. So you definitely see people gravitating to different things. And I know for me, I was kind of thrown into the managerial leadership space, which a lot of people are. And going through that, it wasn't something I felt like I was cut for. I wasn't built for this, but I was able to learn and adapt and adjust. And then, it was like an acquired taste. And once I went through it enough times, I realized this is where I want to be. This is what I enjoy doing. Whereas I'd have to say the first year of management, I hated it. It was not what I wanted. Do you see that as like a common theme?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for any of us that go from being an individual contributor, where our whole success is driven by our ability to develop expertise and get results, and continue to take on responsibility and execute, to shift from that to managing people, and your success is now through others. And that's an incredible change. And your description of yourself is very common. I mean, most managers today are thrust into management with not a lot of support, and they're kind of winging it. Hopefully they've got some good mentorship and they've got a good, boss or manager that can help them on the managing side. Hopefully an organization at some point will invest in management development, management effectiveness, because it's really critical, especially in the world we live in today, because the world today is so much more complex. We're moving at such a fast, rate of intensity and of change, and of innovation. The cycles of innovation is, getting shorter and shorter. Right. So it's really critical to not just kind of wing it. And you're right, that first year is going to be really, really difficult. And you have to make that investment saying, I really want to be a manager. I really want to make that shift. And it's no longer about my success. It's about the success of others. And that's a really major shift for anybody.
Yeah, I think what you just said there is the shift that kind of, and I had a mentor, which I think is something that all new managers need to have, either a coach, a mentor, somebody that can help guide them through this process. And for me, I was really lucky to have a mentor that was kind of, how do you say this nicely, rough around the edges, not afraid to tell me how it is. And, and I remember I had two people walk out on the same day, and they had different reasons why they quit. Totally unrelated, but they both happened the same day, which is very ironic. So I called him and talked to him, and he's like, why do you think that? Why do you think they left? It's like, well, there's better opportunities in other places. We're working too hard. We've got too many projects. And, he's just like, no, that's not it. I said, okay, well, what is it then? He's like, it's you. You don't scale, and you're trying to get involved in everybody's work, and you're not focusing on the success of the individuals on your team. You're focusing on how can you and your team look good, but it's more like you looking good, not how each individual person can succeed and grow. And you need to focus more on that. And that kind of like, light bulb, moment. But if I didn't have someone that really like threw that at me and put that where it needed to be, I wouldn't have picked up on it.
It's really amazing considering all the changes we've gone through, especially the last 2 years, because 2.5 years now because of COVID. But one statistic hasn't changed over 30 years, John, which is the number one reason why people leave a company is not because of the job, not because of pay, not because of hybrid or virtual workforce, it's because their manager, the effectiveness of their manager. Is their manager developing them? Is their manager invested in their success? Does their manager actually appreciate what they do? Those are the top reasons in any company, in any industry, in any size of why people leave. And that
Yeah,
hasn't changed. If anything, it's actually higher than it's been before. So the emphasis on management effectiveness, the emphasis what you as a manager are doing, and how you're managing your people, it's more critical than ever.
yep. I was talking to someone not too long ago who their whole career has been like, what's the next step? What's the next step? Let me get more money. Let me get a higher position. And they're currently leaving their role right now. They just left because for an equal, a lateral move, no extra anything. And it was all because they felt undervalued and underappreciated, and you're hearing that over and over again. I do think it's more prevalent now than before, which is another reason why us as leaders need to figure out how we can be better suited to manage our people. And for me, I think it's building that personal connection, and it's been harder with remote work and Zoom and things like that. It's really a lot more difficult than it used to be when you could just walk down the hallway and grab people for lunch and go get coffee. Now it's kind of, you have this remote workforce. What is some advice you have for leaders out there that are still in this process of figuring out this shift of how to build that engagement with their team when their team's not there anymore?
Yeah, and shift is our word for this
Yeah, it seems
discussion,
to
which
be.
is okay. I use the word shift often, and what I would say, there's a couple of really significant shifts. I think going back to the transition for new managers, where you're an individual contributor and now shifting to managing people, you have to let go of the day to day. You have to let go of getting involved in everything. You've got to start managing through people, managing activities and results, not have to know everything that's going on and get into the minutia. You've got to create time to think. You've got to create time to plan, to create time to be strategic. So that's one shift. The other shift is, frankly, how to manage a virtual or hybrid workforce differently. And even though that's not a new concept, it's been around for quite some time, but clearly we all went that way 2.5 years ago. And a lot of companies are now still at least hybrid. And I don't think that's going to change, by the way, if you're not even completely virtual. So how do you manage that differently? It's still all about relationships. And I say this all the time. We're so focused on, and I get it, it's really hard being a manager today. It's harder than it's ever been, right? Because you're managing multiple generations, you're managing sensitivities relating to diversity, inclusion, and the sort of Me Too movement that's been out there. So this it's harder than ever to have courageous dialogue, to give feedback, but do it in a way that's going to help that person be successful and be effective. And so there's really two spectrums of personality here that I'm going to talk about. One is the person that's too direct, right? That's kind of the bull in the china shop. That's no nonsense, kind of describing your mentor, your old mentor, where kind of no nonsense, maybe a little bit rough on their edges. They may not even be rough around the edges. They just may simply be too direct. And for a lot of people, that just shuts them down. They don't want to respond to that. They don't want to react to that. So that personality has to, back off on that. They have to adjust. They have to dial that down. Now, the other spectrum is the person that is sort of aloof, and they're not giving feedback, and they're hard to read, and people don't know what they're thinking and where they stand until one day they get a performance review, and it's like, okay, why am I getting such a terrible review? So we have to learn how to modify our own personality and styles as a manager, because as a manager, there's a lot of different styles out there. We have to make sure we're being clear, that we're being transparent, that we're giving real-time feedback when it's necessary, but to do it in a way, in the spirit of helping that person be successful. Now, the other really most important shift that I think more critical than ever the last couple of years, and going back to what we said, why people are leaving, because it's all about the relationship. How do you establish trust? Right? So for us managers, and trust me, all of us will do it, we're going to stub our toe often. We're going to say something or do something that's going to piss people off. Well, guess what? If there's no trust, there's literally no tolerance for screw ups, right? Your people are going to be unhappy with you. They're going to either leave or they're going to complain about you to everybody. Now, if you invest in developing a relationship, you invest in establishing trust, if you're more open about yourself and your challenges, and admit when you're screwing up, admit when you're wrong, get to know them, what they need, what inspires them, what motivates them, what do they want from a career, how to help them invest in their success, get to know them as a person. when you really make that investment, it's harder now because of a hybrid or virtual workforce when you're running from one virtual meeting to another. When you make that investment, not only are you creating connection and establishing rapport, but more, just as importantly, when you do screw up, because we all do, there's more tolerance because people know, they actually know who you are. They know where you're coming from. They know your vulnerabilities, know that you're a human being. Some managers try way too hard to be the quote unquote executive. Nothing bothers me. I can run through gunfire and bullets will bounce off me. Too many managers are trying to be that superhero. Be a human. It's okay. Be vulnerable. Demonstrate that you don't have all the answers. You don't have to make every decision. Maybe you have to make the final decision, but how you gathering feedback and input? How are you getting your people to be more involved decision making? So there's many examples on this. But to me, that's the most critical thing: establishing trust, building relationships, especially virtual and hybrid workforce.
Yeah, I know for me, it started out with learning to be able to say, I don't know, what do you think? And that
Right.
one simple phrase has like changed the way, because then it lets people know that I don't know everything and I value what you think. So I want to know what you think. And whether I go with what they think or not, that's we can decide that later. But just listening to them and hearing and realizing that I don't have to be the one talking all the time will help solve a lot of that trust issues. And also, like you said, being vulnerable, it's letting people know what's going on in your life outside of work. Because if you come in as a superhero every day, then you set yourself to a place where they can't relate and communicate. But if you come in and say, hey, yeah, my kid's sick, this is going on, I got all these things going on in my life, and let them know that you're a human and you get frustrated too. And I think another thing is emotions. People feel like oh, I have to control my emotions. And yes, you have to control them, but that doesn't mean you don't have them. That's two different
Absolutely.
things. You're still a human. You still have them. You control them. So it's very two different things. And it's not like you don't feel anything anymore because now you're a manager.
Absolutely. I think that's what being vulnerable is about, is demonstrating that you have emotion, that you have issues, that you've got concerns, that you're struggling with something. It doesn't demonstrate weakness. It just shows that, hey, I don't have all the answers, to your point. And your example, by the way, is great, John, because it demonstrates, not only do I don't know, but what do you think? Ultimately, it's about asking the questions to try to solicit input and getting to understand how people think, how they make decisions. As a manager, because as an individual contributor, and even as an early manager, we're so used to making decisions and driving, conversation. That shift again, as a leader, as a manager, is facilitating dialogue, asking questions, hearing what people think, hearing what, how they want to make a decision, how they want to approach a problem. That's really your job as a manager or leader now. And it gets you to operate at the right level. It gets you more at a facilitator level, a higher level, versus in the weeds. And that's really critical. Too many managers are still way too involved. They want to leverage their expertise. They want to leverage their knowledge. They actually want to maintain their expertise. I get it. And there's a way to do that, but you've got to get your people feeling that they own their decisions. They own their ability to execute their projects.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to that, for me, when I first got into that point, it was a combination of ego and insecurity, and maybe they're the same thing. I don't know, but it was a combination of that. I wanted to feel like I knew all the answers, and I was insecure to ask because, I was a peer of these people just a few months ago, and now I'm promoted to be their boss, and it's a really difficult time to show weakness or any kind of thing that you're not sure about. So you wanted to be sure. So you had this ego issue that you didn't want to show vulnerability. And, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. But then you don't scale. So as a leader, if you're fully involved in the day to day, if you're doing code reviews, if you're checking everything and you don't have someone else doing that, then you don't scale, right? You can't move past that point. And like you mentioned, you as a technology person, you definitely want to keep your skills fresh. You want to keep that thing. And what I've discovered is I have something called Fun Day Friday. And on Friday, I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to code something. I'm going to, do some kind of technical hands-on work. But Monday through Thursday, I'm not doing that. So that gives me my opportunity to kind of stay fresh, or at least pay attention to what's going on out there and do a project that's never important because, I can't rely on my skills anymore. I have to rely on my team. But that Friday gives me that one day to do something that's a little bit more in the weeds.
Yeah, I mean, I love that example. I think anytime you can roll up your sleeves and be one of the crew, so to speak, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Participating as a peer, it demonstrates that you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeve. I think that's great. And it also demonstrates creativity. Let's kind of think outside of the box. Let's try to do little things differently. Look, there's a lot of companies, as you know, in high tech that give employees either days or afternoons or morning, whatever, weeks where they have ad hoc ability to just kind of think outside the box, get out of the day to day, do something really new and different and creative. So I think those are all, it's important to keep ourselves stimulated and keep ourselves in touch with what's going on in the world. But, that this whole part of what I talked about, self-reflection and self-development, but also be more strategic. If you're involved too much in the day to day, and I loved your example, but in addition to that, you've got to create block of time for self-reflection, self-development. When I say self-development, it's the question of, what am I doing to get better as a leader? We sometimes think that leadership, we just kind of put on a suit, right? Because it's part of our job now. I put on my suit and I go to work. But leadership is no different than being an expert in whatever technical field that you're in. You've got to develop that expertise as a leader. What are you doing to invest your knowledge, your skill, your techniques as being effective as a manager and a leader? And that's one of the biggest blind spots of managers today. They're not investing in their leadership effectiveness. They're not investing in their management capability. Whether you're getting training or not from your company, read, learn what some best practices are, how you're going to be more self-aware of your natural style. What adjustments do you need to make to be more effective? Are you asking for feedback from your people? Very specific feedback on things that you're working on. So that investment is really critical and strategic. What does that really mean? Well, are you connected to the market? Are you looking at future trends? What's going on in the competition? What's going on in innovation? What are the next trends in your sector, in your industry, in your technology? Too many managers today are way too internally focused. So these are things that you've got to add into your schedule to be effective and grow as a leader.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right in all that. And, I like to talk a lot about the practical side. Like, how can you take what you just said and make this with practical examples that people can go and do today? And I want to give a couple that triggered in my head as you were saying it. It's like, oh yeah, that's how I do that piece of it. And one of them is, you mentioned read a book if you don't have any formal training. I think the most valuable thing that my company invested in us was an Audible subscription. I have an Audible subscription, so in my commute I can listen to different books, and that's where I picked up things like and a lot of tech people will be aware of this book. It's called The Phoenix Project, where they talk. It's like it's a novel, but it's all about how one guy was thrust into a managerial position where he has to take over this failing project, and it's all about software development and design and how to apply more agile principles to kind of take it over. And being able to learn from those kind of things, but then also how can we focus outward? And going to conferences is probably the best way that I've seen. And it's not the sessions necessarily at the conference, but it's what I call the track in between. It's those times in between the sessions where you're doing networking, or I always make it a point that whenever I'm at a conference, I'm going to eat lunch with someone different every day. Someone that I don't know. I'm going to go meet somebody, and in between, I only go to every other session. I don't go to every session in a conference. And the session that I don't go to, I always stay out at one of the tables with a drink in my hand, trying to talk to somebody and finding somebody just to ask them what they're doing. What do you do? How do you do that? What are your challenges? And try to learn something from that. If I can pick up 1% of what I hear from those other people, then that makes it all worth it.
But those are great examples, because you're not just learning about what they're working on, what their challenges are, and what they're seeing in their particular market or in their company. You're also kind of learning in terms of how they handle things, and you're developing a relationship, a network that you can potentially tap into the future. So whether you go to conferences, whether you go to executive education programs, honestly, the greatest value besides learning is the relationships you develop. And I get it. There's some of us out there that are not, really extroverted. It's not as natural to walk up to people and have conversations or go to a different table for lunch. But to your point, John, the more you do that, the more you take that practical example of what do I actually do? Those are great examples, because, it is about building a network. It is about, finding people that you can actually tap into and have some conversations and share best practices.
Yeah. And just to encourage people out there, I'm really not an extrovert either. I get so nervous and my hands get sweaty, and, I get all worked up when I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go sit with that table over there. And I'm like, I'll have to coach myself into it, and I'll go do it. We'll have the conversation. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to my room and rest. I'm exhausted, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you get doing it. It's just like this conversation we're having here. The more you do this, the better you are. That's the reason why I started this podcast, is to talk to leaders like you and to folks to hone my conversational skills and get better at it, and also hold myself accountable to anybody that reports to me that may listen to this someday, that I'm actually doing the things that I'm saying I'm doing.
No, I think it's great. I think it's great you're doing this, and hopefully your listeners will continue to grow and they get something out of it. Look, my attitude is whether it's podcasts, whether it's reading a book, reading an article, walk away with the one or two things that you can actually implement, that you can actually focus on. For example, we talked about relationships and trust and managing a team when you're virtual or hybrid. A very specific example is, the challenges we're running from one, a Zoom or Teams meeting, to another. And, where are you creating time to have ad hoc conversations? You can't get to know people, what's going on in their life, and them getting to know you, especially if they're around the country, around the world, if you don't take time to have those ad hoc conversations. Have meetings. Yes, it's video, but where it's just really about getting to know each other, and make sure you're creating time in your calendar where it's not just one agenda to another, because then there's no time to develop those relationships and establish trust. The other thing, and that's one-on-one, how do you do it with your team? There's a lot of creative things you can do with your team, because you're hiring people virtually, you're building teams virtually, you're trying to establish a team virtually. It's really hard to do. What are you doing that's fun, that's interesting, where people are going to get to know each other better? Because the better they get to know each other, the better people can manage conflict, the better they can have courageous conversation, give each other feedback. And the more effective they can be in making decisions, and frankly, driving performance. So it's really critical to make sure that you're doing things a little bit differently when you're a virtual or hybrid world.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for that when it comes to doing something fun and virtual? Because I can think of like the things that we do in the office. One day I brought in, like a Nintendo, like a regular Nintendo and a Sega Genesis and a Super Nintendo, and we set up like old TVs and played video games, old classic games one day. But how do you do things like that remotely?
Yeah, I think you have to know, kind of going back to know your audience, right? Depending on what kind of work environment, if you're doing software development or doing programming, or, depending on the skill set of your people and the mindset, what are people's hobbies? What are their interests? You need to learn that. You need to figure that out a little bit, because you don't want to do something that's just not going to really resonate with people, right? People like doing virtual happy hours, and that can be fun. But again, that works with some people, it doesn't work with others. I've heard some really interesting examples over the last couple of years. One example would be, we're gonna actually cook together. We're all gonna get into a kitchen, and let's pick a meal, and we'll rotate a meal. And for those of you who've never cooked but you need to learn how to cook, get someone who knows how to cook and lead it. Doesn't these are sessions that does not have to be manager led. If anything, I would recommend rotate who runs these things, because you got a lot of creative people. I don't know about you, John. I know for me, I rather hear from my people about some fun, exciting things they want to do, not necessarily having me come up with all the ideas. And I try to make sure that with my team, because my team's scattered around the US and around the world as well, and at least my regional team, I try to get together at least once a quarter, and we'll do something fun, and we'll at least break bread together. But virtually, you can do cooking, a cooking experience, and pick a meal and do it together. I've heard a great example about, especially if you're in a national team, where depending on what country it is, they pick a sort of a national holiday that they really resonate, and they get dressed up in that holiday, and they kind of share with the rest of the team, why it's an important holiday for their country and their nationality and their culture, and why they're wearing what they're wearing, and give a little history, and maybe talk a little bit about maybe something they eat during the holiday. And every country kind of has a different tradition, and that can kind of be really cool and fun. And frankly, if you're in a national team, you really learn something about that culture and what's important to them. So those are kind of two quick examples. But the point is, you can do something different. You can do something unique that's virtual.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I know my wife's team, they used to do these things where they would all eat together virtually during, it was right in the middle of COVID when everything was locked down. And it was like, what are you eating today? And there was one guy, he always had like Chick-fil-A. He's bringing in Chick-fil-A every day. Everybody else is cooking something, so has the most nicest plate, and his is like just Chick-fil-A. So you have that variety, which makes fun. It makes things interesting. Another example that they did that I thought was really cool is there's a game called Among Us. Have you heard of Among Us?
Yeah.
It's this kids game. My kids played it, and that's where we learned about it. But it's like a virtual game where people can play against each other, multiplayer game. But you can also create these private rooms where you can be like a private thing. And there's one person that it automatically randomly picks who's the criminal, who's going to be the one that tries to sabotage everything, and everybody else has a task to do. If they complete their task, or if they discover who the criminal is, they win. And if they don't, and he sabotages all the tasks, then he wins. And so it's kind of cool that you can all play together, and it's just your group. There's nobody else in there, no strangers, just whoever has that code. So you can kind of play together and do 4 or 5 games. As each time there's a different, saboteur that's in there. So it's kind of a neat little way to do something interesting that's a little different that anybody can do.
Yeah, and there's so many, fun sort of team exercises that you can do in person, but you can also do virtually. I mean, you can even Google team exercises, and there's a whole bunch of information that's out there. Like a simple one is, writing down something that's really unique about you that very few people know about you, and then you don't say it. Everyone puts it like into sort of a blind location, and then everyone kind of guesses who that is.
Mhm.
I mean, so there's all kinds of exercises or fun games that you can play to just get to know each other better. In addition to playing some games together and building some bond, like the game you just described. So the point
Mhm.
is, find time to do it. Create time as a manager to make sure that people get to know each other better and have some fun experiences together. Because it's important. Because as you know, people are getting burnt out. They're working virtually. They're not as connected as they used to be. And there's a lot of positives to being virtual, right? You're not commuting. You've got more quality of time. More, you're able to be relaxed. You're probably more productive in a lot of ways. But the downside is the lack of connection, the lack of feeling I'm part of a team, I'm part of an organization, I'm part of a culture. So as a manager, you've really got to work hard to create that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the ways that we can build that team is to always try to find what are those cool things. And whether it's volunteering together, whether it's doing something, an activity that's just for fun, or doing something that's also a little bit team building, like having each session have someone different on your team present something that they've learned that's different, that's we're not doing today, that we can all learn from. Yeah, I think all those are really cool examples. I did want to talk a little bit about why it's important for leaders to be agile and vulnerable in a day like today, so that they can help their employees. And right now we hear about the great resignation and all these people leaving, and there's talk about potential recession, and there's conflict in different parts of the world. Why is all this kind of helpful, or why is being vulnerable and being an agile leader helpful during all these situations?
Right. So as you know, I wrote this book called The Rise of the Agile Leader. Can you make a shift? And I use the word agile more in the context of the verb, not agile methodology, Scrum
Yeah.
methodology, even though our agile leader model fits into that methodology very, very nicely. So agile, the verb, as we know, is all about being adaptable, being able to shift quickly and be nimble. And as a leader, think about it. It's to your point, the examples of COVID, the Great Resignation, focus on retention. Now the quasi recession that we're already in. It hasn't started yet. We're kind of already in it. How long it's going to last, we don't know. And then you think about the multiple generations, focus on diversity, inclusion. The global workforce and global competition. The cycles of innovation getting shorter and shorter. We can go on and on. So the point is, it's a very complex world. So how do you create stability for yourself and for your organization throughout all this chaos? So that's really critical. That's a big part of being agile. And the reason we came up with the agile leader model is because the question is, what's the future of leadership, right? And we started asking this question, by the way, over 3 years ago. And we started interviewing CEOs, interviewing clients and companies. And we the more we talked to them, the more we came up with this model that we end up calling the agile leader. So it is about, being more connecting to people. It is about being open and being transparent, because people want communication. Communication has always been the foundation of good leadership, but the era of command and control is gone, right? The reason people are leaving, we've already spoken about, by the way, most of the reasons why it's so critical during all this right now, because it is about appreciating people. It is about valuing them. And how are you doing that? Not just through recognition and promotions and money, but really spending time with them. And as a manager, that means you can't be involved in the day to day. You've got to create time on your calendar, in your schedule, for managing people. A lot of managers aren't doing that. They're too busy with client meetings or with people meetings or project meetings. They're not spending enough time managing, developing, mentoring their people, getting to know their people, building relationships, establishing their team on a more effective level. So all the things we've been talking about are how you address better retention, increased engagement, getting people to be more inspired. Why do they want to be here? I mean, ultimately, that's the question. Yes, it's about you as a manager and how effective you are and how invested you are in their success. But when's the last time you talked about the strategy, the purpose, the vision, the mission of your organization? Where are you? Where are you going? Do people understand the connection to their role and their job and their responsibilities and what they're working on to the overall success of the company? And by the way, as we all know, the strategy of your company is changing constantly. It's evolving constantly, right? We're in that world today where a traditional strategic plan just doesn't work anymore because things are changing so quickly. So as the world changes quickly, as consumers and their needs are changing quickly, leaders have to be able to change and adapt and shift quickly as well. But it also means that leaders have to spend a lot more time connecting to their people, communicating their people, letting kind of know where they are, where we're going, and why. Why are we here? What are we here to accomplish? So this whole notion of culture is so critical. Your culture is really a reflection of your external brand, the brand that you're out there marketing to your consumers and your clients, of why buy us. What's the experience you get from being associated with our product and services. That's the same message that you're trying to explain to people why you want to be here. What's the experience you're going to have being a member of our organization, member of our team? Why do you want to work for us? Why do you want to have a career here? So again, managers have to spend much more time talking about these things, discussing these things, making sure people get it. They understand kind of where we are, where we're going.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think sharing that strategy. I think transparency is the word that we're talking all around right here. It's just being transparent with your team members about what's going on and where they fit in and why their work is so important. Because I think number one, the reason why people leave is because of their manager. Number two is because they don't feel valued. They don't feel like what they do is important. It makes a difference, right? So if you can show that you are vulnerable with them, you trust them, and then they begin to trust you, and then you also show that their work that is important and it is valuable to the whole company. I think those two things together will really go a long way in making that employee feel appreciated.
Oh, absolutely, John. It's a hard time. It's a hard time for everybody because of all the impact we've had the last couple of years of COVID, and now this recession and the Great Resignation and turnover. Now inflation. There's a lot to deal with. There's always going to be a lot to deal with. I don't think it's ever going to change. And look, I get it. Not everyone's meant to be a manager. If your motivation is because you want to advance your career, want to make more money, sure, you can get away with managing if your heart's not really in it. But you really have to be passionate about wanting to help people be successful, because that's ultimately what management's about. It's no longer about your success; it's about your people's success.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. Chuck, I really enjoyed this conversation. How can people connect with you online and pick up a copy of the book and learn more about the things that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I appreciate that, John. Yeah, the best way to reach us is through my business website, which is mcgpartners.com. You can also go to my own personal website, and there's information about how to purchase the book there. And that's Chuck Moller, and that's MOLLOR.com.
All right. And I'll link that up in the show notes at geekleader.com. Chuck, thanks so much for coming on the show. I feel like I've learned a lot and had a really good conversation.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.